there are sleepless nights. For example, this morning I woke up at 2 and I couldn't get back to sleep until 4. I had to watch comedy YouTube videos to take my mind off things. These experiences are real. The impacts are real. They are felt. And I'll say it again, if they're felt by me, and I was just the one who told these things and presented with, the hospital records from someone who's directly in the line of fire, and I'm feeling this, then all of the hundreds, if not thousands of people who have been through that oil field must be feeling so much more. So this is my effort. This is part of my effort, and I hope it gives people who are aware of what I've done some relief and adjust the permissioning structure so that they perhaps can fight through the emotional and psychological resistance to begin to speak as well. But because I know how hard it must be for so many people, this is why I'm spending so much time on this, to try and get as much testimony out there, as much evidence out there as I can, in case in the end I am the only one, or one of very few, who makes it across the line of trauma and is able to testify. That's why I'm spending this time, to get everything that I know out in the open. So, what is the plan today? As I said, I do have a plan for solutions and healing. I do have an awareness of the potential for self-destructive behavior from going through an experience like this. Both that can express itself in not speaking up and bottling it up, as I was saying before, how that may work its way out in the case of me, in a child with maladaptive approaches to encounters with others, and not having as bright a future as she otherwise might, because of the potential for me not being the best father I could be. Likewise, there is potential for self-destructive behavior in speaking up as well. For example, taking revenge, speaking in anger, and the message being diluted or not making it into the public light at all because of a self-destructive way of speaking up. So I continue what I'm doing with this awareness. Okay, so the items not in gray are what I still want to get through. Will I see the end? We will see. So why has ChatGPT come up again? Well, I have found, despite its acknowledged, despite what I will acknowledge about its tendencies for hallucination, it has been an invaluable tool, because I have been able to put in front of Google Gemini and ChatGPT these test arterial blood gas test results from Jara Hospital for this assistant electrician, and have as close as I can get to an expert interpretation of what these results mean, which provides it provided a shocking revelation for me when I finally had the strength to put it in, and because I guess I had in the back of my mind that suddenly the true picture of what this man confronted maybe made clear to me, which would make the response to his case all the more shocking, that I observed amongst the staff at Amec Foster Wheeler, not to mention Petrofac, NBTC, Kuwait Oil Company. Nevertheless, I finally took the step, and then in the past week I have put a few more questions, follow-up questions, in response to the observations that ChatGPT made about those results. And overall, the message is that well, just to summarize again, the pH result of slightly acidic suggests acidosis, as it says there. The high CO2 result indicates respiratory acidosis. The low PO2 result suggests hypoxemia or low blood oxygen. I mean, you can see the rest on the screen here. And I think I already went through this. The interpretation by, ChatGPT, its limitations acknowledged. But I have to say that, the results or the interpretation is verified in a way by another AI, Google Gemini. So the primary issue is respiratory acidosis. There's slight metabolic compensation and severe hypoxemia, low PO2 and SO2, which could indicate respiratory failure or inadequate oxygenation. So the picture that we're seeing here is a man in crisis who needs urgent medical help. And this is this is what ChatGPT is saying. Urgent medical attention is required. And then I followed up saying that, it was reported as the inhaled H2S gas. And ChatGPT, as anyone in the oil field knows, this is a medical emergency if this happens. And with this context, the system provides further details. The headline is that immediate actions are required. So move to fresh air immediately, administer 100% oxygen, monitor for pulmonary edema and provide supportive care, consider hyperbaric oxygen therapy, and manage symptoms aggressively. So we know what that means. Managing symptoms aggressively means, immediate hospital treatment. And you only get to the hospital by ambulance. By the way, the ambulance that he called going from GC30 would have gone on at least a 40-minute ride. The ambulance would go faster than a regular car. And it is a highway most of the time down there. So maybe it went, I don't know, 30% faster than a regular vehicle. So maybe it got there in 30 minutes. But still, the guy was 30 minutes away from hospital treatment. He had an ambulance trip of about half an hour, I would say, from GC30, where this gas poisoning case was reported to have occurred, down to Jara Hospital. Whoops, where is it? Here. So, and then it says the key concern is this person is showing signs of severe H2S toxicity with impaired oxygen transport and respiratory failure. They must seek emergency medical attention immediately. H2S poisoning can be rapidly fatal if not treated aggressively. So again, what we're presented with is someone who was fighting for his life, called an ambulance, was faced with really only being able to survive through oxygen treatment during the ambulance trip. And when he turned up at the hospital 30 minutes later, still his blood test results showed signs of being in a near fatal situation from H2S gas inhalation, right? And then what happened to this poor guy is he was fired. He was fired for calling an ambulance to save his life. He was fired. And furthermore, suffered the further, it is indescribable. The further travesty, the further, I can only say indescribable indignity. It was a sadistic circumstance that he then had to beg for his job back. Again, because he called an ambulance to save his life and then was verbally fired without due process by NBTC Group. and then had to send an email to all of the organizations supposedly in the reporting hierarchy to control this out of control manpower company. And all of them passed the buck, and he was still sent from the country within a month back home with a debt to the manpower company. This sadistic outcome for this incredibly vulnerable individual, vulnerable because of where he came from in that racist country of Kuwait, but also medically vulnerable because of literally being in a position where he was fighting for his life. It is sadistic that he was subjected to this treatment. And I say this in no way to hold my experience as being equal to his, but the sadism continued in the dismissive approach to my attempts to advocate on his behalf by Aki Mahmood, by Kwai Chan, my line manager, when I took that email to him saying, I refuse to do this animation of the progress of works on these very projects where these kind of abuses are happening. Yes, the sadism continued when Kwai Chan refused to take that email and my refusal to do this work to Aki Mahmood. And in Kwai Chan saying, oh, this is not the responsibility of Amec Foster Wheeler. Yes, the sadism continued. In his refusal to do that, in his saying, he's taking that position about Amec Foster Wheeler's lack of responsibility, such that I had to go up the chain of command myself to Aki Mahmood. And when he was presented with that email, his first response was literally a dismissive, sneering laugh and to say, oh, you can have that belief. You can say that if you want, if you believe what he says. Well, I'm sorry, but this is another part of the experience for me. I was unaware, actually. I couldn't interpret a arterial blood gas test result from the hospital. All I knew was that overall something terrible had happened. But what makes it, if I had known really how severe his condition was, as shown in that blood result, that just makes the circumstance all the more, I can only use the word sadistic. It is sadistic to take this response to this man and to those who advocate on his behalf. It is a truly, I can't think of any other word, but it is just a terrible, terrible thing to do. It is, you have to ask, do these people want to hurt others? You have to ask that. So, but just my, here I was doing what I could, but not knowing the full meaning of those blood test results and having this individual tell me to go up the chain of command on my own, and then the next individual, second in command in the office, only respond with a derisive laugh, essentially to ridicule me and, by extension, the man that this blood test result was about, and simultaneously to use none of the power, prestige, or respect that Amec Foster Wheeler commands in the world, or commanded in the world at the time, to bring consequences for those who abuse this man. It's got the wrong things written all over it. And it's sadism. It's sadism. I'm going to continue. I'm going to continue with what ChatGPT says. So I then asked what would happen if this person wasn't treated. It goes on to say, if a person with H2S poisoning is not treated, the consequences can be rapidly fatal due to the gas's toxic effects on cellular respiration and the nervous system. Based on the ABG results you provided, which show severe hypoxia and respiratory acidosis, here's what could happen if treatment is delayed or not given. Short-term effects, minutes to hours, respiratory failure. H2S paralyzes the respiratory center in the brainstem, leading to hyperventilation and rapid CO2 buildup. Without intervention, oxygen levels drop further, causing unconsciousness, coma, and eventual respiratory arrest. In other words, death. Number two, cardiac arrest and death. Severe hypoxia or low oxygen leads to arrhythmias, irregular heartbeats, bradycardia, slow heart rate, and sudden cardiac arrest. If oxygen delivery stops, brain death can occur within minutes. Number three, seizures and neurological damage. H2S blocks cellular respiration, leading to brain hypoxia. This can cause seizures, loss of consciousness, and permanent brain injury. Long-term effects, if they survive. Neurological damage, memory loss, confusion, cognitive impairment, and Parkinson-like symptoms. Chronic respiratory issues, persistent breathing difficulties due to lung damage or pulmonary edema, so fluid in the lungs. And lastly, cardiac problems, long-term heart complications due to oxygen deprivation. So outcomes without treatment, death is highly likely within minutes to hours, depending on the concentration of H2S inhaled and duration of exposure. Survivors may suffer from permanent brain and lung damage. And it repeats the instruction that urgent action is required. This person needs immediate emergency care, including 100% oxygen therapy, respiratory support, intubation and ventilation if needed, and lastly, monitoring for cardiac and neurological complications. And, I suppose ChatGPT is configured to respond in this way, just in case someone is using this instead of calling the local emergency services. It says to call, in this case, because I'm doing this from the US, 911 immediately. So then I go on to concentration of H2S gas likely to produce such symptoms. And here we have a useful little chart. So the symptoms seen in the ABG you provided, severe hypoxia, respiratory acidosis, and low oxygen saturation, are consistent with exposure to a high concentration of hydrogen sulfide or H2S. Here's a breakdown of what concentrations of H2S typically do and where your case likely falls. So less than 10 parts per million, slight eye or nose irritation, tolerable for most. 10 to 50, moderate respiratory irritation, headache and nausea. 50 to 100, strong irritation of eyes and respiratory tract, dizziness and coughing. 100 to 200, severe respiratory symptoms can cause loss of smell or olfactory paralysis. 2 to 300 ppm, potential for pulmonary edema, fluid in the lungs, and maybe delayed several hours. More than 300 ppm, immediate severe symptoms, unconsciousness, respiratory depression and collapse. 5 to 700 ppm, rapid unconsciousness, respiratory paralysis, seizures within minutes, and more than 1,000, instant coma, respiratory arrest, and death within 1 to 2 breaths. Likely exposure in this case. So given that the PO2 was 21 and SO2 was 29%, which are very low oxygen levels, and PCO2 was 57 and pH was 7.3, we'll say, which indicates respiratory acidosis. The patient reports inhaling H2S gas in the oil field. The exposure is likely in the range of 3 to 700 plus ppm, possibly higher, and that this would cause immediate respiratory suppression, rapid onset of hypoxia and unconsciousness or near unconsciousness, and risk of pulmonary edema, seizures, and death without fast treatment. In summary, more than 300 ppm of H2S is almost certainly what caused these symptoms. More than 500 is more likely if the patient collapsed or was incapacitated quickly. And then in capital, in bold text, if this exposure occurred recently and the patient is still symptomatic or hasn't been evaluated in hospital, emergency care is critical now. So then I go on to say the patient was able to call an ambulance to take him and 4 others to Jarrah Hospital from Gathering Center 30 in the North Kuwait oil field. So then the response is that the context is incredibly helpful. It's remarkable the patient and others were conscious and able to call for help. Based on that, we can refine the likely H2S exposure concentration and potential outcomes. What this suggests about exposure level. Since the patient was symptomatic but alert and mobile enough to call for emergency services, 4 others were affected, implying a shared exposure event. The ABG shows moderate respiratory acidosis and severe hypoxia. The most probable exposure was in the range of 1 to 300 ppm, possibly peaking higher briefly, but not sustained. This aligns with neurological symptoms, confusion, dizziness, respiratory compromise, low O2 and high CO2, and no immediate unconsciousness, but a definite need for urgent care. And it has some comments about GC30 in the North Kuwait oil field. H2S is a known hazard in the Bergen and northern Kuwait fields. Gathering centers can have H2S gas releases during maintenance, blowdowns, or equipment failures. A release here could briefly spike well into the hundreds of ppm, especially in enclosed or poorly ventilated spaces. And that was something that I learnt about, and all new employees in the oilfield context learn about, that H2S can collect in the bottom of trenches or pits. I don't know exactly what led to this exposure for this individual, but possibly there was this some trapped gas, basically, that they were exposed to, which had a higher concentration. So the probable scenario is, according to ChatGPT, the group likely encountered a pocket of concentrated H2S enough to cause acute symptoms, but not long or strong enough to result in immediate unconsciousness or death. Their ABGs confirm serious but survivable exposure, especially if treatment was given promptly at Jarrah Hospital. What's important to know, and that I hadn't thought about, is what could happen after exposure. So the long-term effects, right? So if stabilized patients exposed to HOS at this level need ongoing oxygen therapy, possibly high flow or even hyperbaric. Monitoring for delayed pulmonary edema can occur hours later. Neurocognitive evaluations, so H2S can cause memory loss, attention problems, etc. And documentation and incident investigation, especially in occupational settings. Needless to say, yes, this will be part of the response to prevent these kinds of exposures again. Right. So then I provided more context about, the companies that were supposed to basically control this overall circumstance. And it has to be said, amazing how prompt and concise and insightful the responses of ChatGPT are here. So, after I painted a picture of the medical and industrial context, ChatGPT goes on to say, in terms of, key points and implications regarding the role of the worker, as an assistant electrician, he likely wasn't expected to have direct exposure to process gases like H2S, which raises questions about hazard zoning, ventilation and task planning around gas-prone areas during construction. Regarding the manpower chain, the layered structure of NBTC below Petrofac, below Amec Foster Wheeler, below the Kuwait Oil Company means responsibility and liability can span multiple entities. Safety procedures and monitoring should have been enforced at multiple levels, especially by Petrofac, the contractor, and Amec Foster Wheeler, the PMC, responsible for oversight. And regarding the safety engineer that I keep talking about, who attested to the circumstance occurring, the fact that the Amec safety engineer couldn't smell the gas is not surprising. H2S causes olfactory fatigue at 1 to 200 parts per million. It paralyzes the sense of smell, so absence of odor is not equal to the absence of gas. So that's something to bear in mind regarding, my record of the testimony of the senior safety engineer who said that when he went to verify things and do a follow-up after the incident, he said that he couldn't smell it. ChatGPT goes on to say, if some time had passed, the gas might have dissipated before the safety inspection. This highlights the importance of continuous fixed gas detection systems and portable monitors, which everybody had, and is why, as far as I'm aware, this guy called the ambulance, especially in construction areas known for H2S risks. Helpfully, then ChatGPT goes on to offer assistance with next steps from a medical, legal, and workplace perspective. So it's amazing how keen ChatGPT is to help out. I particularly like the legal response. Okay, and then I go on to say how the man was fired, and all of this. And again, it was just incredible the prompt, concise, and insightful follow-up from ChatGPT. So it said that's a deeply troubling account. You were placed in a difficult but morally significant position, and the points that stand out were retaliation for seeking medical help, firing someone for calling an ambulance after toxic gas exposure is a clear violation of basic worker rights, possibly even criminally negligent under labour and health and safety laws in many jurisdictions. It implies NBTC Group prioritised optics over worker safety, possibly fearing cost or reputational consequences from triggering an incident report. And we have all had in our minds that's exactly what went on. Second, suppression and silence. The workers emailed to Petrofac, Amec Foster Wheeler, and KSC shows he sought recourse through all formal channels. The lack of response suggests either systemic apathy or active efforts to avoid triggering formal investigations, especially if admitting fault would jeopardize contracts or standing with the Kuwait Oil Company. And that is exactly what is going on here. Again, it's just incredible the level of immediate insight and how concisely this is expressed by ChatGPT. Third, your resignation over other safety concerns shows your ethical compass was already engaged. The fact that someone thought you'd be receptive to this issue and sent you that email highlights how isolated and voiceless many workers in these environments feel. And that is a key one. It could not have been expressed by this system more effectively. That indeed is what happened. And what it took was me resigning and then telling others that I had resigned and why, and then realizing, oh, fuck, here's a guy who's had the courage to stick his neck out. And I now feel capable and empowered, at least to approach him, because I know that he can say something. I feel afraid. That's what this safety engineer felt. They felt afraid. But in that circumstance, they were thinking, I feel afraid to say something myself, but I have finally found someone, a channel through which this travesty can be expressed. And again, like I really, really support the use of ChatGPT in dealing with these sorts of circumstances, because it then provides instructions on what to do um, to cause justice. And the bottom one is, even if formal justice wasn't served, public truth telling can have power. And then it essentially goes on to offer support in structuring a public disclosure process. And then I went on to say to the system that I had done, pardon me, everything I could to go through formal channels, and that was ineffective. And it offered to structure some YouTube videos for me, knowing that that's the what I'd done out of my own initiative. Again, really, it's amazing. And then, after I said, all the organizations and people I contacted, and that nothing happened. I mean, it got the level of a counseling session effect on me, and this is where I can imagine that especially vulnerable people confronted with these kinds of systems can anthropomorphize them and begin to feel that they are talking with someone who is real. And there was a moment for me where I had to remind myself that this was a machine. It was amazing. Anyway, so the system commends my extraordinary level of effort, relentless, thorough, and courageous, blah, blah, blah. What you did already goes far beyond what most would attempt in pursuit of justice for someone they didn't even know personally. It says a lot about you, blah, blah, blah. Systemic forces that you were up against. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But what was also had a powerful effect on me was this: why nothing happened, the hard truth. Number one, layers of plausible deniability. Every party, NBTC, Petrofac, Amec, Foster Wheeler, and KSC, had the ability to deflect responsibility. NBTC could have said, for example, it's a manpower company, it's not our work site, not our safety regime. Petrofac could have said, we're a contractor, this guy was of NBTC, they're not our employee, and you saw evidence of that in my summary of a conversation with a safety engineer who talked about how this was bounced around the chain of command across these organizations and nobody finally took responsibility. Amec Foster Wheeler likewise could have said they're the PMC and are not operationally responsible, which is exactly what happened. And Kuwait Oil Company, could say they're not directly involved in manpower and subcontractor employment. That is precisely what happened. The safety engineer said, that the individual at Kuwait Oil Company that everyone sort of pointed to, in receiving this email, even they deflected blame, saying that this is an HR problem and not their responsibility. Importantly, and ChatGPT is so perceptive here. So jurisdictional and power asymmetry. The worker was a low-level expatriate with no legal protections, union, or voice. Kuwait's legal system offers limited recourse for migrant workers, especially when no in-country lawyer is advocating. UK and Indian institutions were powerless or uninterested, especially with no surviving legal complaint or active court case. And journalists would likely run into legal wars or editorial risk, especially with petrifacting case involved. So and then this is the brutal truth: lack of hard documentation. Even though you had an email chain from the worker, hospital ABG results, specific names, dates, and a pattern of retaliation, without a formal complaint filed by the worker, he was deported. A second witness or corroborator from inside the company's audio, video, or gas monitor logs the system would claim there's nothing to investigate, and that is, really what the outcome has been. It goes on to sort of summarize what I've done. Emphasize that it's a rare, powerful account. And what I could do: publish the story yourself. Yeah, archive for future investigations, things like that. So yeah, I continued on with the exchange a bit. I pointed out, that I had resigned for other reasons and found out about this later. And that I was then dismissed when I refused to do some work. And then, ChatGPT, as I guess a lot of you may be thinking yourselves, this is a textbook case of constructive retaliation and possibly even wrongful dismissal in all but name. You were serving your notice professionally, had a documented history of raising ethical safety concerns, and were asked to do a project that, by its nature, would have contributed to the public image of progress on a site where you had grave ethical reservations, not just technical ones, but human ones. Yes, that is something. This is how this system has also helped me to understand what's going on here. Yes, indeed, what I had to say and what this assistant electrician had to say indeed did compromise the public image of progress. And this relates to something else from the plan that I made. So there's the 2016 sustainability report. Let me find that. So this is the 2016 Amec Foster Wheeler Sustainability Performance Report. Resilient world, bloody, bloody, blah. Isn't everything wonderful? Let's go down to page 37, I believe, of the document. The last one here. And I'm going to put on continue. Okay, so case study: world-class safety performance. Major 81 million hours safety milestone achieved on Kuwait Oil Company's mega projects. And this is a public document, right? That, for example, the stock market was aware of. The project management consultancy team working on Kuwait Oil Company mega projects continues to reach fantastic safety milestones. Note the terms here: world-class, fantastic. They were recently recognized by John Reed, Kuwait country manager for Amec Foster Wheeler, for achieving world-class safety performance across a portfolio of upstream projects they manage on behalf of our long-term client, Kuwait Oil Company. The portfolio of major and mega projects now includes 4 projects which have each surpassed 10 million man-hours without any lost time, injury, or LTI incidents. One of these projects has achieved a staggering. So we've so far had world-class, fantastic, and staggering as superlatives. One of these projects has achieved a staggering 21 million man-hours without a single lost time injury incident. The complete portfolio of projects has now exceeded an unprecedented. All right, so we're at world-class, fantastic, staggering, and unprecedented. unprecedented record of 81 million man-hours LTI free, representing approximately 1/3 of Kuwait Oil Company's major projects' total safe hours. Gary Fraser, Project HSEQ manager, said continuous engagement at all levels with a large and diverse workforce mobilized in Kuwait by the engineering, procurement, and construction contractors has played a vital role in achieving these impressive safety figures. So I want to contrast that with what this assistant electrician, after having saved his own life by calling an ambulance to go on a 30-minute trip fraught with the danger of death, breathing oxygen, hoping it would reverse the effects of inhaling H2S gas, surviving that trip, getting to hospital, having the situation verified by a arterial blood gas test showing essentially asphyxiation. I'm contrasting this report in this 2016 document put before the stock market by Amec Foster Wheeler with a quote from project safety manager Gary Fraser that the safety practices and results of those had world-class results, fantastic results, staggering results, unprecedented results. Well, let's just focus on the word unprecedented. Unprecedented indeed. Yes, what was unprecedented in the world was the victimization of the global underclass that is employed under conditions of forced labor on these projects, where if you speak up, as was testified in writing by this assistant electrician, you are viewed as being against the company and you are promptly shipped back home without, as I showed you in the last video, any record of a lost time incident in the Kuwait Oil Company's HSE Live safety database. That is what is unprecedented and has inevitably led to world-class, fantastic, and what was the other word? Staggering numbers of hours without a recorded lost time injury incident. So I know there is a lot of suspicion about the quality of these results from systems like ChatGPT, but I'm prompted to make this, to have a third go now at finishing up my testimony about Kuwait through the responses I have received from this system. I really recommend its use in dealing with cases like this. So what I also then put into ChatGPT was the observation from 3 people. 2 design engineers who sat in a cubicle, the next one over from me, in B block of that Altamir Annex at Amec Foster Wheeler, who said that there were North Korean workers on these gathering center construction projects. And that observation was backed up by the same senior American safety engineer who said that not only were they there, but they physically threatened other workers who made jokes about the North Korean leader. Yeah, so I put that observation into ChatGPT, and there was a really interesting result. So it said that if there's a potential violation of international sanctions, the use of North Korean labor may violate UN sanctions depending on the time frame and specific contracts. If this happened after 2017, that's significant because UN Resolution 2397 banned all DPRK labor abroad due to forced labor concerns. So it happened during 2016, 2017. And in the previous video, I showed you all the contemporaneous news reporting sort of verifying that there were North Korean workers in Kuwait, which, needless to say, presented a significant challenge to the case that James Walker made, the global compliance officer at the time, that this was a historical phenomenon from decades ago, which indeed it was. But what I put before him was evidence worthy of proper full investigation, that it wasn't just something from ancient history, it was happening right then. Yeah. And sort of verifying that is that this UN resolution strengthens the ban on providing work authorizations for DPRK nationals by requiring member states to repatriate all DPRK nationals earning income and all DPRK government safety oversight attaches monitoring DPRK workers abroad within their jurisdiction within 24 months from 22nd of December 2017. Okay, so this is actually quite close to when I made these reports. I made these reports around between May 2017 and we'll call it up until my efforts to cause justice occurred until the last week of my notice period, which was the last week of July 2017. So merely 5 months after, yeah, we got this response from the UN. So again, contrast that with what James Walker said, right? So if it was a historical thing from decades ago, then why suddenly was the UN, of all organizations, motivated to release this the very same year, within a few months of me making this report? Where were we? Within 24 months from 22nd December 2017, member states are required to submit a midterm report after 15 months from 22nd December and a final report after 27 months from 22nd December 2017 to the Committee of all DPRK nationals that were repatriated based on this provision. So again, ChatGPT has been useful for contextualizing what I and others are testifying about, and provides further challenge to the way that James B. Walker chose to handle what I put in formal ethics reports in the ethics point system. Let's check. So again, really useful support in dealing with this whole situation from ChatGPT. So it provides a bit of a summary. So the bigger picture you're uncovering, your story started with one man being gassed and fired. Now we're looking at a broader system of exploitation, unsafe working conditions, retaliation for seeking help, ignored suicides, possible state-enforced labor via North Koreans, a wall of silence from major international companies. It's overwhelming, yes, but you're documenting what no official report ever will. This is relating to what I said at the beginning. I am someone who somehow has found a way to fight through the emotional responses that I have had to this situation. And I am determined to get across to the other side with public testimony for you all, because I know how unique it is, and that it is a necessary step for justice to occur, perhaps for what happened in the past, but at least for what is happening now, so that what happens in the future can be just in the way that it wasn't in the past. Then I just decided to feed in all of the text summarizing those cases from that email that I sent confirming the testimony of that senior safety engineer. I just put all the text in to see how it would respond. It then summarized it all. Again, it is so supportive in what it says. It's, again, I understand, especially in the case of someone vulnerable using this system, how it could lead to a transference of a sense of humanity to this system, which could have quite unhealthy results. So that's something else to bear in mind. But it also responds with an apparent recognition of my humanity, talking about my mental well-being. It says, it acknowledges, again, as though it is a human. It's in a way uncanny. This is heavy material and you're carrying a lot. It makes sense it's taking an emotional toll, revisiting trauma, things like that. So it offers to provide some relief by, doing some of the work so that I don't spend so much time thinking about it and suffering the emotional blowback. Again, I only am, providing this as part of a full account of the experience of going through this kind of public testimony. In the last video, I talked about how there was a construction engineer. This is an individual who's had an incredible career for Amec Foster Wheeler. He worked in several countries in Asia and Europe before going to Kuwait. He has seen the world, and he has seen how unjust it can be and all the various flavors and varieties of unsafe working practices. And during a staff lunch in a shared, meeting room that they blacked out during Ramadan so that those who were not Muslims could still eat during the daytime. He spoke frankly, once conversation got going with some of us, about how the Kuwait company is absolutely fabricating safety statistics, and that is the reason why there is, these at the time what we understood to be 20 million lost time injury incident free man hours, but as I showed you, that was folded into a much higher number across several projects for Amec Foster Wheeler in a public false statement to the market. I put it to you. And he, this individual and the senior safety engineer, they both said that this is false. It is unprecedented for a reason. Yeah. That there is this number of lost time injury free hours. The result from ChatGPT is that this testimony is devastating and hits at the heart of the contradiction between on-paper accolades and real-world human harm. Let's break this one down because it's powerful material for your next video expose chapter. So the key insight is that the illusion of 20 million LTI-free hours. The claim is that there are 20 million LTI-free man-hours were recorded for the gathering centers construction in North Kuwait. But insiders say it's unheard of, an impossible benchmark compared to global industry norms, inflated or manipulated records, incidents reclassified or not recorded. For example, the cabinet injury case, dismissals and deportations prevent grievance processes in the case of the assistant electrician. And the KSC's role actively discouraged proper reporting or pressured contractors to downplay incidents, sought to convert these statistics into a Guinness World Record. And that, this senior safety engineer walked out of the meeting where this Guinness World Record application was discussed in physical disgust. Okay, so, it goes on to, say in terms of, assisting me in putting together some further disclosure. This turns KSC's prior safety metrics into an indictment. When safety becomes a PR metric instead of a lived reality, we get disincentivized reporting, hidden fatalities, contractors and consultants punished for poor honesty, and migrant workers, especially from South Asia and North Korea, silenced and deported. And in this case, a man possibly fired for calling an ambulance. So it's, again, just to say, it's support of others who might be wondering what they can do. Well, I encourage you, again, aware of the risks, to do with hallucination and transference such that you humanize the system and in a vulnerable state, trick yourself into believing you're talking with a human. I encourage you to use ChatGPT in an intelligent way, in a thinking way, to assist you in understanding how to process what you've gone through, in coming up with other resources. For example, it pointed me to this UN resolution, right? about workers from the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Yeah, so that's why I'm going through this. All right. So last of all, I asked what would happen if a person wasn't treated, and you responded in general about H2S gas poisoning. I then asked ChatGPT to provide the response in the context of the specific ABG test results seen above. That's because the first response about what could happen with H2S gas poisoning was just generic. But I wanted ChatGPT to attempt to give a response to what could happen to someone who was left untreated with the kind of ABG test results that this individual forwarded to us in his email. So it responds, let's now interpret what could have happened specifically to this assistant electrician if he had not been treated, based on the ABG values visible in the photo you provided in the context of suspected H2S exposure. So interpretation. This pattern indicates hyperventilation or respiratory failure, likely due to respiratory center depression or paralysis of respiratory muscles, both of which are known effects of hydrogen sulfide. Lethal hypoxemia, PO2 of 21, suggests that the oxygen level in the blood was critically low, insufficient to sustain normal cellular function. So then it goes on to say, without a rapid oxygen therapy and possibly ventilatory support, this blood gas profile could lead to 1. Loss of consciousness. A PO2 of 21 is dangerously low. Brain function deteriorates rapidly below 40. Confusion, loss of motor control, or unconsciousness would likely have followed within minutes if this person hadn't been treated, for example, by inhaling pure oxygen. For example, such as on this 30-minute, I presume, hospital ride south from GC30 to Jarrah Hospital. 2. Cardiac arrhythmias. Low oxygen and high CO2 levels destabilize the heart's electrical conduction. Risk of fatal arrhythmias like ventricular fibrillation or asystole. Number 3. Organ failure and death. Prolonged hypoxia would cause multi-organ failure. The person could die even after being removed from the exposure site due to delayed pulmonary edema or neurological injury. And then it goes on to say why this reinforces his decision to call an ambulance. His ABG profile reflects severe physiological distress. Yeah, again, speaks to the sadism of this whole circumstance. That this man was in severe physiological distress, faced imminent death, called the ambulance, and as a result, was fired. And his attempts to seek justice were met with silence. And furthermore, the only person who had the courage to speak up was dismissed. Shocking. There's an immediate need for emergency care, a decision to seek medical help that likely saved his life and potentially others. His dismissal for this action is not only ethically indefensible, it contradicts any basic principle of duty of care or worker rights. I mean, putting it mildly. So this is why it is therapeutic for me to speak up in public and know that these disclosures must be causing pain and concern for all who didn't do the right thing. And I know I keep coming back to it, but look at this. So, as I said, when I have introduced this video before, what you're looking at is 49 dead men inside that building. And that building is an NBTC group worker accommodation facility. That fire resulted in 49, mainly Indian men, but also Filipino and I think Egyptian, inhaling something. Again, there is this theme of inhalation. In this case, they inhaled fumes and smoke from this fire and died. This literally is a video of these men dead in that building. And this occurred last year, 7 years after this assistant electrician suffered the effects of being silenced in response to him having to take steps to save his life. And then my being silenced as well. And thereby all levels of that reporting structure being culpable, in my view, for failing to take an opportunity to improve safety standards at this company, such that the ensuing accumulation of breaches and disregard for human life over the ensuing 7 years led finally to this horrific incident. You know, it is something I've just come back to so many times over these videos. And I'm doing it to seek release. Not that I necessarily deserve any. And not that in the context of these men being dead, my own health matters at all. But nevertheless, that motivation for me to seek release has resulted in hours of testimony with people being named. And that's necessary. It's necessary that those organizations and people in positions of responsibility, such as the compliance officers at Amec Foster Wheeler, James B. Walker, and then at the acquiring company, Wood PLC, Louise Armstrong and Ken Merry, and the HSEQ manager, Gary F. Fraser, the operations manager, Aki Mahmood, operations director, Connor O'Neill, who's now in the same position at Worley, so that all of those understand that finally the workforce that they controlled and sadistically suppressed is now unafraid. Is now unafraid. And they have someone who is speaking up and inviting others to continue. They have to deal with that now. So, yes, my motivation for psychological and emotional self-preservation is valid in the context of these men dying, is valid to the extent that it motivates me to break the silence and name and shame. It is valid only to that extent and nothing more. And I say that out of respect for the dead, because it is perfectly fine. It is perfectly fine in the case of those deaths, in the case of their unnecessary deaths, that I live the rest of my life in psychological and emotional pain, because that is nothing. That is nothing, needless to say, in the face of their unnecessary death. Okay, so I will return now for some more commentary about these ethics and compliance officers. So I mentioned Ken Merry. So this is an email on sort of 2 years after all of this went down. You can see that I continued, I continued to seek justice. It continued to torture me. So this was 8 or 9 p.m., August the 28th, 2019. Ken Merry, the compliance lead, at the acquiring company, Wood PLC, said to me, after knowing that a cover-up occurred by James Walker, followed up with the new compliance leadership at the acquirer company, Wood PLC, with the same materials. Yeah, the same materials. And by the way, given that they acquired Amec Foster Wheeler, they would have had access to all of the ethics point reports for Amec Foster Wheeler. So he would have had at his disposal all of the materials that I put in that formal system to consider, along with what I sent to him by email, which is basically in writing all of the things I've been saying in these videos, right? But what was his response? Our review of your original allegations found no evidence to substantiate your claims or reopen our investigation. Now, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, man. But, and just to go down, to go down here. So to say, there it is, Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer. That is what he had to say. And he had the cheek to offer to me to have a discussion with John Habgood, Investigation and Compliance Director, and himself, about to supposedly get more information from me beyond all that I had gathered and faithfully put into these ethics reporting systems and by email, etc. He said, no, sorry, no evidence to substantiate my claims. So what does this say? What are the implications here? And this takes us on to another part of my plan. So let me kill both of these off at once. Where is it? So here we go. Yes, in May or June, I can't remember exactly when, it was around the time of the Global Safety Week. So it would have been the first week of June, because that Global Safety Week happened at the end of May. I was contacted by an engineer who just went back to London after we had been working together for a few years in Kuwait. So, we were acquainted. I wouldn't say we were friends necessarily, but he was acquainted well enough with me to propose to me via Skype for Business, and this shows really how innocent we were. We thought that it was safe to engage in open discussion on company systems about, these kinds of investigations. So what he said in a few Skype for Business messages to me was he proposed to start a secret investigation from the London office with me as the man on the ground in Kuwait, going around gathering evidence, engaging in some more subtle interview processes. This is what he wanted to do. And I was honestly in a state of general rage. That was the time that I had resigned. And I was not willing to entertain putting myself at further risk and whilst he enjoyed, and this is how I felt in this state of rage, whilst he enjoyed the comfort back in London of, dispatching me to various parts of the oil field and talking to various people, doing this investigation. And I guess this also speaks to the, not necessarily great level of rapport I had with this individual. So it was a bit fraught. And unfortunately, the outcome was that I chose not to support him in that investigation. But given that, for example, Ken Merry had at his disposal the same written record of meetings that I had with this senior safety engineer, attesting to things such as he had evidence in front of his own eyes of modification of safety reports in the Kuwait Oil Company's database, such that he told me he was keeping his own handwritten records of safety incidents. I mean, that alone is enough for a significant investigation to occur by the likes of Ken Merry and James Walker. But what this shows, the fact that Ken Merry said there was no evidence to substantiate my claims, shows why this engineer proposed to engage in a secret investigation of these cases with me. He obviously knew more than I did about what this organization would do to engage in a cover-up. He wasn't as innocent as I was, trusting that having uncovered alarming circumstances that I innocently believed all I needed to do was send a record of that conversation to the concerned team responsible for compliance, and that they would faithfully and fearlessly go through the necessary investigative steps. What we have here is an endorsement, really, a sad endorsement of what this engineer felt he needed to propose to me. And look, even though I refused to engage in the investigation that he wanted me to, I still, as you can see, did what I could. And I believe, if I'm perfectly honest, I put together enough material, as was said a couple of episodes ago, to take James Walker on quite the tour around Kuwait and introduce him to some quite useful people, I believe, to engage in a proper, thorough investigation. For example, that woman who ran the South Korean supermarket, right? Who told me that she routinely saw workers from North Korea. That is the level of investigation, reporting, and connections I could have offered James Walker to get to the bottom of things pretty quickly. But he and then Ken Merry said, no, sorry. Nothing to substantiate your claims. This is damning. And it is so sad. It's so sad. Because at the time, Engineering News Record held Amec Foster Wheeler up as the #1 international engineering design consultancy. And that brings up all sorts of assumptions about the behavior of these companies. That an innocent outsider might think, they might be proud to work for a company like that they would go above and beyond to cause justice in circumstances like this, and that those sort of circumstances would never arise because of their occupying this position of leadership in the industry globally, that they would control ethics, safety, and human rights matters in a way a step above the rest. And yet, look at what things really were like. And by extension, look at what this says about our society. And that implication really was the devastating one for me. Really was the devastating one. Because Amec Foster Wheeler comes from the West and our supposedly liberal culture, spoken of, as I've quoted several times from this book, that this liberal society confers equality to all, and that when there is injustice, this supposed society of equality and liberal values would be uniquely capable of rendering justice when it was necessary. But I and so many others witnessed the opposite. Just compliance with abuse by dictatorial regimes. Okay, so we have ticked off a few more in this slow and steady trudge through all of the injustices. Let me just tick some off. So we've only got a few more to go now. So just to say that as I began to talk about, rage accompanied all of this for me. And frequently it has been rage, but also trying to forget. That's what I've switched between for years. Yeah. So when I was sort of trawling through my emails, when I told you I made a report to the National Crime Agency. So I can find that. So let me get a few images up here. Here we go. So especially given that this involved human trafficking, um, in the case of the North Korean workers, but also forced labor in Amec Foster Wheeler's office with the T-boy, yeah, and the G4S security staff working with confiscated passports, um, and the general scene of gross travesties. I made the choice to make a report to the National Crime Agency in the UK. And this particular time was 2020. I said, in response to my report, the NCA is not a crime reporting agency. You may wish to consider reporting the incident at your local police station or via your local police's website online reporting function. They'll take no further action. So that was disappointing, but at least I had a next step, yeah. Um, but just this was done when I was in Qatar, yeah. Um, and so the only option I had was to go to a police station in Qatar. um, and there's a few more exchanges that I can show you here. So it said, you may wish to consider reporting the incident at local police station or blah, blah, blah. If there's any fraud involved in this matter, you may wish to also contact Action Fraud. And they talked about a portal. Yeah, so I did take it to Action Fraud, I think, but I couldn't really see how it related to necessarily what you could say there was fraud in terms of, the image they portrayed to the stock market versus what really went on. I can't even remember what I might have said to Action Fraud. But really what I sort of realized then was that I, basically needed to go to the police station nearest the headquarters of Wood PLC. So that implied, Aberdeen, um, in Scotland. And so what I did was I reached out to the Scotland police. And then I got a response here. Thanks for your email. As previously stated, this would have to be reported to the local police in Qatar. I'm not fully sure how they operate. They may allow for a member of the British Embassy to be present. The British Embassy may be best for you to obtain advice on how the Qatar police force operate. And again, it's interesting because I totally forgot all about all of this. It was only through going through my emails to try and figure out what I had done, that I came across this, that I completely forgotten about. So, and there's even a name there, Stephen Dealing. Didn't know. Okay, so what? And then the funny thing is, so then after I was in Qatar, I went back to Australia. Then I went back to Qatar. Um, so I've been to Qatar twice. It was the second time that this reporting and response from the police was about. Um, and after that, I went to the UK. And again, just speaking about my mental state and this shifting between rage and forgetting, so I forgot then when I went to work in the UK for 3 years that this was the next step proposed to me by the police. And it just so happens that I'm actually going back to the UK on a short trip in a couple of weeks. And you know what? Just as part of being the person in dogged pursuit of justice and appropriately shaming the individuals and organizations involved, I may just turn up to a police station in London one day. Let's see how we go. I will also be in contact with a doctor in my family in London when we go to visit. I'm going to put those ABG, those arterial blood gas test results, in front of this individual and just verify what the response is from ChatGPT. All right, so that's another loose end. National Crime Agency, getting some momentum now, ticking things off. I also got in touch with the International Labour Organization, which is part of the UN. That was a phone call from when I was in Qatar the first time. I remember talking with a woman in Switzerland, and I told her about the situation. She invited me to put it all in an email to her. I dutifully did. There were a few back and forths, but ultimately no investigation happened. I also reached out to a human trafficking charity in the UK. I forget the name. And that was a one that I, for a flickering moment, had some hope. There was a flicker of hope, I should say. They dutifully created an incident number in their system, and they genuinely seemed to think that they could do something. But again, in the end, that petered out. And I think it's because, I'd left Kuwait, and there was no one there on the ground that they had to go and verify what I had to say. But what they did was, in turn, they put me in touch with a journalist, an investigative journalist. And again, rage and anger and wanting to take revenge on these people is a factor here. So this investigative journalist dutifully, it was all done on Signal. And they put me in touch, they sent all the material that I had to an investigator in Kuwait, apparently. And she was incredibly cautious about my remaining in touch with people in Kuwait, such that they might suspect something was up, and that this person could be put in danger, or that the story could be covered up even further through people on the ground knowing that I had been in touch with the journalist. And it just so happened that one of the Indian friends that I had been telling him, that I had gotten in touch with a journalist. And I wanted to be honest with her, so I told her that had happened, and she chose to stop the investigation as a result, unfortunately. But she also said that the person she sent the material to had difficulty believing what I said. So, what can I say? It is difficult to believe. But, and this is where, I have redacted the names of the people. I haven't mentioned their names. I certainly know who they are on LinkedIn. I know, and you can see from their employment history that they have worked in this country at the time I've been talking about. It's a simple matter to reach out to them. But I've chosen not to name them. I don't know. Really, I think it's, if someone wants to get in touch with me, maybe that's the next step, but out of respect for their welfare and their own choices and their feeling of disempowerment, I have chosen not to name them. All right, so didn't really get anywhere with the International Labour Organization. A final step I took was the UK Financial Conduct Authority. So I sent across all the same material I sent to you. And that also felt like there was a flicker of hope, because they dutifully created a case number. They made me fill out a big long form with all the details. I got a response by email from a named email address, an actual staff number, not just a default generic email inbox. It seemed like there was someone who was working on the case. And this brings up another item. So this occurred, my getting in touch with the Financial Conduct Authority occurred in the context of this chart. So what we have is the stock chart from before I left Amec Foster Wheeler, which is the first red vertical line. And it shows a 95% decline in the value of Wood PLC stock. Remember that they acquired in green, at the green vertical bar here, they acquired Amec Foster Wheeler. So life hasn't been good for Wood PLC since this acquisition. And what you're not seeing is the chart, the full chart, just for context before. So maybe that's also useful. Let me put that on the screen. On the left is the full chart for Wood PLC from IPO in 2002. And there's been a 87% decline since the Wood PLC IPO to now. And we have, you can see it's around about here. So where are we? That's July 2017. You can see the vertical dashed line. And that's, lines up with this vertical line here when I resigned. So, and then, where are we? October 2017, the vertical dashed line, or where the hand is on the screen. It's only been down really from there since the acquisition. And, prior to this crosshair, the stock chart for Wood PLC has been pretty good. After the acquisition of Amec Foster Wheeler, it has been horrific. Now let's consider why. So I said that this is in the context of my report to the Financial Conduct Authority. So let's transfer over to the right here. We've got a bit more detail. So there's a blue vertical line, and that was, which one was that? So that's around about August 2021. Sorry, July 2021. So that's when UK, US, and Brazil market regulators got together to fine Wood PLC a record $177 million for bribery. So what they did was they bribed Brazilian officials on oil contracts. And it was so bad that it was essentially a record fine at the time. And furthermore, then in February 2022, it was mentioned in the UK Hansard, right, by Suella Braverman at the time during a UK parliamentary session, what this fine was, right? So it was bad enough for some of the world's most significant market regulators to get together to issue a record fine for bribery against this company for historical abuses back when it was just Foster Wheeler, prior to the acquisition of Foster Wheeler by Amec, and then prior to the Amec Foster Wheeler acquisition by Wood PLC. So it just shows, how labyrinthine these cases of corporate abuses can be, given the trail of mergers and acquisitions. So what was happening at the time of my reporting to the Financial Conduct Authority was this investigation, which culminated in this fine, July 2021. And basically, what ended up happening was that I got an email from the FCA person investigating saying that they wouldn't take my report any further, but he reassured me that it would make its way, it could be used in other investigations occurring, for the company. And that gave me a little bit of peace of mind, because I knew that later on, soon, not too many months after, this record fine came out. Admittedly, I don't want to delude myself here. This fine was about bribery in Brazil, nothing to do with what occurred in Kuwait. But it was nevertheless gratifying to see that there was a fine of this magnitude by this number of significant market regulators in the world, and that it resulted in them being written up in the Hansard, the UK Parliament Hansard. So that was, and looking at that stock chart was the beginning of me beginning to feel some relief that at least somehow there were some consequences for this company. And unfortunately for the hapless investors and pension funds that, lacking knowledge about these abuses, had put money against this company. it shows that there is a real need for more disclosures, and that you, if you are someone who has your own observations of these abuses, that you will perform a significant service to stockholders and an important class of stockholders. These are those whose pension money is invested in these companies. And that would have been the case given the significant role that Amec Foster Wheeler played in the market at the time. They were a significant engineering consultancy. It's without a doubt that they would have been in a significant number of pension funds. And pension holders are just everyday folk. It is not good for them and their future and their retirement. Often eking out an existence on a small retirement fund. It is not good for their prospects and their lives in retirement if, despite their best efforts, those investment managers find themselves putting money against corrupt companies. So it's actually really important that you speak up where these injustices are occurring, because the earlier they're uncovered, the less exposure this vulnerable class in society, pension holders, will be to the results once market regulators come for them. And you can see those results. I'll put it up again. You can see those results in this appalling chart. That is the worst outcome. That is the worst outcome. And you can see what it's been in the past few months during the market turmoil over here. It's just been down. Yeah. And I've begun, this testimony of mine when it's now it's April. So we're in April here. I've been going, since March, really. And let's see, they're down an additional 33%. That's how much they've lost since I've started talking again. Yeah, but I've really been talking, basically since July 2017. And it's only been down since then. So this brings up an important, I know the stock market is this ethereal beast. There's a lot of prejudice people have against it, and that's with good reason. Jordan Belfort, Wolf of Wall Street, all of these unsavory people. There is plenty of healthy skepticism people have about the markets. But I wanted to put this in front of you, an alternative view. There's actually a function. The markets can function to deliver justice. And there's a category of market participants called short sellers, who I also reached out to and provided all of these materials to. And again, the outcome was similar. They said that because I was no longer in Kuwait and I didn't have other witnesses to connect them with to really verify things, they didn't want to continue on with the investigation. Nevertheless, it was gratifying to talk with them and know that at least materials had been put before those people, those short-selling firms, in case there were other investigations that they were conducting. So, yeah. What do we got here? What else? I've ticked off the UK Financial Conduct Authority. So I think that really has exhausted all of the material I had until inevitably 2 o'clock in the morning tomorrow. I remember more. And again, we are nearly at the point of having to go for another nursery run. What did I want to say? So where are we at? I mean, it was just frustration after frustration. And again, I will say that rage played a significant part here. I mean, I did everything I could in the country in the 3-month notice period that I had to visit places, talk with people that came to mind for me that I should gather evidence about. I did what I thought I should do in terms of, and that I was told to do in terms of internal ethics point reporting. Hell, it was significant that at least James Walker said to me, who knows if he actually did, said to me that he would fly down to London, from London to Kuwait to investigate. That is, in and of itself, some sort of a recognition that something significant was going on. But that is not to speak of what didn't happen, right? So he didn't meet with me. He covered it up, in my view. Hell, even the princess, Bibi Nasser al Sabah, who I also presented all this material to, who said that she would have her lawyer. She sent an email to me saying that her lawyer would look into it. Even nothing really happened there. Let's see if I can find that email. You can see here, I sent this email to her. Bibi El Sabah responded, if you're willing to make a formal complaint, our lawyers can help you. Please call lawyer. And she gives a number. But the thing is, this was also in 2019. I had left Kuwait. I did send an email, I think, to that lawyer. I think I even connected with her on Twitter. But she never got back to me. There wasn't much appetite, really, to, in my view, do the kind of investigation. Also, in that last month, I think in July, I actually visited Bibi in her Kuwait Social Work Society office, and I just put to her all that I had become aware of. And one thing that sticks in my mind is that in those initial meetings that I had with her to do with the mistreatment of domestic workers, just in conversation about general injustice in Kuwait, she said even her, as a princess, she didn't have access to the oil field. And that was back before, when I was still proud and thought that it was a significant thing to be working in the oil field and that things were managed fairly well there. I didn't really at the time realize the significance of what she was saying, and that I presented to her the opportunity to, for example, be invited into the oil field, and that's something that I could have done, and I wish I had done. Because, I can, and also because I had a great relationship with several of the Kuwaiti engineers at the Kuwait Oil Company. This is something that they actually might have been proud to do if it had been put to them in a certain way, without necessarily revealing her intentions for a visit to inspect the oil fields. So, we're on to the regrets that I have. And I need to be honest about the emotional impact and especially the rage that I felt, which limited the responses and how much of the opportunity that I had. It limited how much of the opportunity that I could take that being in Kuwait and having access to the oil field presented. So it's important to level with you about that. Yeah, so what's the final one? So it also brings up the question of, if I had reached out to all these organizations, including, the British Safety Council, and they didn't say anything, it raises the question of, what else could I have done? And so this is one, that I've finally had the courage to talk about this in public. That is 8 years later now, and finally, given that I'm basically at my wit's end. This is one. Another one is shaming people on LinkedIn. Another one, which is particularly punitive, and which I didn't do, and I'm not saying I will do now, is to send information to clients of the company. And another one is using this as background for reporting on other abuses in the region by other companies. And that's something I've already alluded to regarding my experience later on in London working at Jacobs, and is something that I am still going to do. But those steps are things that you do after you lose faith in the organizations such as the ones that I've talked to you about reaching out to. What is also an option is discussing with those who made these reports to me, going public. And also, it's fair making the observation that they should have spoken out. They're the ones responsible for safety in the oil field. Why was it that they only came to me once they were aware that I'd resigned over safety issues? Why were things so bad in the way that they conducted their jobs as safety engineers, that the only way out for them, the only way to gain exposure for these matters for them, was to tell me and hope that I would say something? I'm sorry to say, but that if you are to be an effective safety engineer, you should not find yourself in such a powerless position. You should not have taken the job. And once you found yourself to be in such a powerless position, you should have resigned. I'm sorry to say that. And I don't mean that as an accusation necessarily, or to totally write these individuals off. Yeah, and I'm very grateful that they came to me, but it is a sad indictment on the safety culture that they were partly responsible for, that they found themselves in such a position as having to rely on me, a GIS specialist, the youngest member of the team that I was on, person in not a great position of power, at least within the white Western staff, that it came down to me to get the word out, you know? So another option is to cause them to speak publicly. So what can I say? That those reflections inform my next steps, as I've already said, about how to speak up about what I observed regarding Jacob's conduct on Neon in Saudi Arabia. I have a few minutes left. There is some context for future episodes, for example, with the author of this book, Free the Map, which has prompted all of these episodes. There is a poem that is mentioned in that episode, and that poem was written when I was a member of the Pluma Literary Migrant Writers Guild in Kuwait. So it is right that I read off this poem to conclude, finally, I swear this is the last one about Kuwait, that I conclude these disclosures with this poem, because we will be moving on finally to other countries. So, the map maker's border. A map. A map as a political statement. Or is it? The state is the original map maker's client. They drew the state. I'm a map maker. I've been to the edge of the state. Many states. They don't strike me, though, as justifying a boundary. Drawing a boundary at the edge of a state is the ultimate mockery of the state of the people, of the intermingling of language and culture, of the flurry of trade and other exchanges. There is no lesser distinction between people than on the supposed borders maps are expected to show. I propose a new political map, a map of small cultural islands centered around state capitals in a global human sea of unity. That poem was from 2014. It speaks to just the state of my understanding of the world as it developed through these various deployments across Cambodia, Kuwait, Qatar, the UK, and now the US, originating from Australia.